Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's chat. My name is Tara, and I'm a team member here at Understood. Today, we're going to be talking about ADHD, sleep, and morning routines that work. And we're so excited to have Stephanie Sarkis, PhD, joining us today. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hi, Tara. I'm great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Stephanie, would you like to take a moment just to briefly introduce yourself to those joining us?
Sure. I'm Dr. Stephanie Sarkis. I'm a consultant at Understood, one of the home experts. I'm also a therapist and also a diplomate of clinical child and adolescent counseling, which means I went to a lot of school and have seen kids for a long time. So, in summary, and I've written about six books on ADHD, a seventh book on gaslighting. So I'm happy to join you today, talk about kids and routines, especially because back to school is coming up soon.
This is true. Thanks, Stephanie. I do want to remind those joining us that we will be taking parent questions today. We'll try to get to as many as we can. If you have a question, please feel free to type them in the chat box below. And it is helpful if you include your child's age and grade so that Stephanie can give a more targeted response. So let's get started. Stephanie, why are morning routines challenging for both kids and their parents?
Well, I think first, kiddos don't really want to be on a routine. I think that's part of the issue is that we try to fit kids into our routines. And there's also the thing about going to school. I mean, kids would rather just kind of play outside all day. So there's that aspect. And then plus, when you have issues with high activity levels like an ADHD, you tend to have issues with sleep, which means you're waking up your kids and they're not fully awake yet. And so that can be a big issue too. Just getting them moving in the morning can be a real challenge. And then you may not be fully awake too. So you have that added into it. And tempers kind of flare in the morning, trying to get, and there's a rush and stress. So I think that adds to the hassle or kind of challenges of the morning.
Got it. So let's start with the basics, right? So how can a proper sleep schedule help to make that morning routine run a little smoother?
But when you have that routine and structure of a sleep schedule, it really helps keep kids on the right path and parents too. So what I recommend is having the same sleep and wake time every day. And so that means that even on weekends, your kid gets up at a certain time and goes to bed at a certain time, even as they get older into middle school, high school ages. Also, having a set time where electronics are turned off. So studies show that 2 hours before bed helps, having all backlit devices turned off, as TVs, iPads, phones, anything with a backlight. And what that does is that when you have a backlit device on, it helps inhibit melatonin, which means that melatonin is the thing we need to get moving in our brains to help us get to sleep. And when you have ADHD, you have less melatonin showing up. And when you look at backlit devices, it decreases your melatonin even more. So your brain doesn't get ready for sleepy time. So if you could shut off those electronic devices at least an hour before bed, even if you just start at 15 minutes, half hour, 45 minutes, work your way up to an hour, that's great. Okay. Also, having the curtains that block out light help a lot too. Now, if your kids need to have some light on at night, that's totally okay. But most kids need a completely dark room. And also having some kind of soft music playing or a guided meditation recording or progressive muscle relaxation recording when your kid goes to sleep. And the more they listen to that, the more they'll go to sleep anyway. Also, move the TV out of the room. So a lot of kids need to listen to that background sound to go to sleep. Right. I recommend that parents start substituting that with a recording instead, and then move the TV out of the room. So those are just a few of the ways that you can make sleep time go a little bit easier. And make sure you have a good transition time between getting ready for bed and then going to bed, whether that's reading a book with your kids, snuggling. And reading a book, by that I mean using a non-backlit device or a real book to read. So that seems to not hurt melatonin issues.
Got it. Okay. We are starting to get some parent questions in, which is great. Our first question comes from Dee. And Dee would like to know if you have any helpful tips that will help with morning routines with an ADHD 7-year-old boy.
Well, first, I think it's important to put the morning routine on your bathroom mirror. So write down exactly what you need your child to do. There's also apps too. I think right before we started recording, there's an app called Happy Kids Timer that has really cute animation and times the kids for how long they're doing different tasks. So you can say, okay, you brush your teeth for 7 minutes, and then you can put it on the timer that way. And it rewards kids for doing their chores. Also, keep in mind, too, that the ADHD brain doesn't do very well with multi-step directions. So we want to give our kids only one direction at a time. And also, if your child's taking medication, talk to your doctor about what time you should give your child their medication, because sometimes doctors will tell parents, well, give your kid their medicine right when they wake up and then let them sleep for another half hour, wake them up again, and they're much more likely to get moving in the morning.
Got it.
So, and also having some kind of movement going on too. If you have just a couple minutes of jumping jacks just to get your kids awake and moving, that raises dopamine in the brain. So they're more likely to follow a structured schedule.
Okay. Very nice. Thank you. You raised a great point earlier when you said that kids normally don't want to be on a routine anyway. So I wanted to follow up with that question and ask, how do learning and thinking differences impact kids when it comes to their morning routine? Okay.
Well, first there leads to I think the primary thing is not wanting to go to school, reluctance to go to school when you have learning and thinking differences, right. Because sometimes you're singled out in class or you feel different than the other kids. Okay. So there's more of a drive to kind of want to stay at home where it's safe and you have unconditional love. So I think that's one of the things we're kind of up against. So first we have to figure out what's going on at school and how we can make school life easier so kids are more likely to want to go to school in the morning. I think that's one of the biggest issues. Also looking at whether there's some sleep issues going on. I recommend that a lot of kiddos get a sleep study, a pediatric sleep study, to make sure there's nothing like sleep apnea going on. That's where your soft folds, your throat close in, you don't get in that deep sleep. Okay. And also some other issues too that can happen at night. So you want to kind of eliminate those to make sure there aren't any other medical issues going on that lead to lack of sleep.
And so you mentioned the having tips on the bathroom mirror for like morning routines, but do you have any tips that will help parents establish helpful bedtime routines?
Well, I think it's really important that there's consistency. And if your child has ADHD, there's a pretty good chance that one or both parents have ADHD. So really important that you get on a structured routine and you shut off your electronic devices too, but really important to shut off electronic devices. Kids may tell you, well, I really need my phone with me, to set a timer. There are other ways to do timers. And also kids text each other in the wee hours of the morning, and that really impacts their sleep. So it's really important that you take kids' electronic devices and take them with you into your bedroom. Leaving them on the counter, they sprout legs and walk off. So really important that we have kids that are not exposed to electronics after a certain hour. That'll make a big change in sleep habits. And again, consistency is key.
Okay. Yes, consistency is key. Our next question comes from Catherine. Catherine says, my kids are in high school and middle school, and one is at school at 6:30 a.m. and the other at 7:30. How do I put a sleep schedule together for them when they really don't want to get up at 6 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday?
Right, and I don't really blame them. I wouldn't want to either, but the closer you can get to that, the better. So even if it's just 8 a.m., let's say I think the more the concern is with older kids is that when you have to get up at 6 a.m. for school, and then you're getting up at 10, 11 a.m. on the weekends, your body can't compensate that for that on Monday. So if you even make it so that your kids are getting up at 8 or 8:30 or 9, that's better than sleeping till 11. So you have to be a little bit flexible with it, that you don't necessarily have to get your kids up at 6:30, but the closer you can get to that, the better.
Okay.
And again, within reason.
Our next parent says, I've noticed that my 10-year-old son is now suffering with falling asleep. Could this be due to out of routine and excess screen time?
It's possible. I would have to know your kid to know exactly what's going on, but the kids I see, it's usually screen time right before bed, difficulty of having transition time. There's a lack of transition time. Kids go right from activity to bed. We need to let them know that you have 15 minutes before bed, 10 minutes before bed. You can get a visual timer so kids can actually see how much time is left.
Okay.
Also, talking about how the day went. Maybe there's some stresses going on that we need to talk to our kids about. And making sure that kids get enough exercise during the day as well. Making sure that if they have a 504 IEP plan, that recess is never taken away, that's part of the plan, because kids need that exercise. Again, not only to think better during the day, but also to get enough sleep at night too.
Anna would like to know, what is the recommended amount of sleep for a 9-year-old child?
9-year-old child is between 8 to 10 hours, and for teenagers, actually 10 to 12 hours. So that increased in the last several years. So when you have kids that are only getting 5-6 hours of quality sleep, we're in a constant sleep deprivation. And taking naps, we used to think that would make up for sleep, but it really doesn't. So it's really important that kids get that full 6 to at least 6, but 8 to 10 hours a night.
Okay.
And even more if they're teenagers.
Got it. Desi has a follow-up question, I believe, in regards to how you were touching upon electronics. The question is, what about electronics that are set to reduce blue light on displays at night?
I have not seen any research yet about whether that's actually effective, but the most effective thing is just shutting them off.
Okay. Our next parent says, in regards to sleep, what if they have major issues still and they don't even use electronics or have the TV on? Do you have more recommendations?
If they have major issues and you've noticed this has been going on for a while and you can't really find a thing that's causing it, it's probably a good idea to go to your pediatrician or your child adolescent psychiatrist and ask them about what options might be available to see what might be going on with sleep. Because just like adults, there are different reasons for sleep issues. So that's where I would probably talk to your clinician and ask them what might be going on, especially if you've tried different behavioral techniques and they're not working.
Got it. Our next parent says, my son has a great bedtime routine. However, no matter how many visuals and reminders are given, my son waits to the last minute to move or react. He has ODD as well as severe ADHD, but seems like in order to not fight and start the day off on a bad foot, I need to just choose my battles and get him dressed and help with everything. She's having a difficult time even bathing him, so she's looking for recommendations to help with this.
So I'll just explain for everyone, ODD, you may have heard of ADHD, but ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. That's when kids have kind of a strong sense of justice, but it goes a little bit more than that. So like you ask your kid to take the trash can to the curb, and they automatically say no. They're not even sure why they're saying no. They just say no. So that's just that in a nutshell. That can be really tricky because positive reinforcements tend to not work so well with kids with ODD. I'd ask your child what they think would get them going in the morning. Now, it may be that kids with ADHD and also ODD tend to be more night owls, and our school systems are not geared towards them. So it may just be that it's kind of a bear in the morning to get kids moving. That may be just the way it is for a little while. But also, again, is your kid getting quality sleep? And that's something I'd really look at. So is it that they don't want to go to school? And if so, what's going on at school that they may not be wanting to go? And again, you have consistent nighttime routine. And also you may want to consult with a mental health clinician too, just to find out if there's other ways. Because again, positive reinforcement is tricky when kids have ODD.
Got it. Our next parent says, my teenager has a lot of trouble going to sleep at night and is up until 1 a.m. and then has to get up at 6 a.m. I've heard that teenagers naturally stay up later, but do you have any advice for getting teens to get more sleep?
It's really important that your teen gets enough exercise during the day. So exercise is one of the most effective ways to get good sleep, because when we exercise, we raise our brain chemicals called dopamine and serotonin. And that's also, the brain chemicals are low when we have learning differences like ADHD and attention differences. So when you exercise, again, not only are you able to focus more during the day, but you tend to go to sleep easier and stay asleep at night. So that's the first thing I check, is make sure they're getting enough exercise. Are they taking any medications that may cause issues with getting to sleep? That's another thing to look at too. Is your child naturally night owl? And the way you can kind of tell is one or both of the parents are night owls. That's a genetic thing, our body clock. So it may just be that the school is just set up at a time that just does not work for your kid's body cycle. And that's really hard to switch around. But again, if we do gradual changes, like getting them to bed like maybe a half hour earlier or a half hour earlier than that. Also, how much homework are your kids doing? So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends 10 minutes of homework max per grade of the child. So that means in 12th grade, your kid should only be having 120 minutes of homework. So if your kid's having more than that and they've been diagnosed with something like ADHD or learning disability, you can get a reduction in homework added to their 504 IEP plan. So that's another thing too. If your kid's getting a chunk of homework that is really hard for them to complete, it's really important to get that added to the 504. Also, I would look at too that any homework or that is based on principles that weren't yet assigned in class, to just not complete that and make sure that's added the 504 IEP, that if it's homework that the principals have not been covered in class yet, the kids can turn that in incomplete. Okay. So that puts a lot of stress on kids and keeps them up at night, that they're afraid that they didn't do their homework correctly.
Got it. Thank you. Our next parent says, hi, Dr. Sarkis. How can I help my daughter to sleep through the night? My daughter is 7 and wants to sleep next to me. She'll often leave the bed and come to ours. Seems like a form of separation to me. Any tips?
So, hi, back. First, what I would recommend is having a gradual moving to your own room. So what that could be is sometimes parents get a little cot or a little day bed in their room, and then the kids will sleep there. Then after a few days, they have them move down towards their room and sleep in their room. And then you give rewards for staying in your room all night. So that tends to work pretty well, especially around the age that your child is. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to definitely work, but doing something where you're gradually moving your child over to their own bed helps. Or you just turn them around when they come in your room too and say, okay, no, it's time to go to bed. So it really depends on your parenting style, what you're comfortable with. So again, either say, okay, no, I'm going to walk you back to your room, or you gradually move them out of your room little by little.
Okay, perfect. And I do want to ask you, are there any other apps that you probably have that you can recommend to parents that can help? I know we touched on them briefly at the beginning of the chat, but I wanted to know if there are any more apps that we can recommend.
Well, there's one called Sleep Cycle, and I think this is actually probably more helpful for parents. But what that one does is it measures what time you go to bed, what your sleep cycle's like, and what time you're getting up. So it's not 100% accuracy, but when you are in deep sleep, you reach a level of sleep paralysis where you don't move. And so the app records when you're moving and when you're still. So it gives you a good idea of what your quality of sleep is like, and you can bring that data into your child's doctor or your doctor. So what you do is you either put the phone on the nightstand or you put the phone face down on the bed. So again, that would mean that the phone's in your room, and I just told you not to do that in your kid's room. But that's another app that people have been found to be helpful. Again, it's not 100% accurate, but it does give you a good guideline to see when you're going to bed, when you're getting up. And people find that when they use that, they tend to be a little more accountable for how long they're sleeping, and they tend to get to bed earlier.
Got it. Okay. Our next parent, Katie, says, both my son and I have brains that wake up at night. We are energetic, chatty, creative right before bed. I'm often told to calm the mind before bed, but I'd love to harness that energy and intensity. Do we really have to attempt to shut it down, or can we do homework, interesting conversation, and art an hour before bed and then calm down right before bed?
Well, that's a really good point. So this isn't one size fits all. So if there's another way that works for you, that's great. And I say go for it. If your kids get enough sleep anyway, and they're doing okay at school and their stress level is pretty manageable, then I do whatever you feel is best for you and your kid.
Okay, perfect. Our next question, our parent says, Dr. Sarkis, can you explain more about how to teach kids to use mindfulness or progressive relaxation to help them fall asleep?
Sure. One of the things I teach kids is name 3 things you can see, 3 things you can feel, and 3 things you can hear. And you have kids do that, and they tend to stay in the present moment. That's what mindfulness is kind of staying in the here and now. I also have them do deep breathing. So you inhale for 5, and I tell kids it's kind of like when you sniff a flower, and then when you exhale for 5, and that's kind of like the breath you use to blow out candles on a birthday cake. So you inhale for 5, exhale for 5. You have kids do that a few times. Or what you can do is for little ones, you can have them blow through a bubble straw, like do bubbles on their exhale. So that gives them a kind of a visual of what exhale looks like and when you're doing relaxation breaths. Also, you can have your kids lay on the ground, put a stuffed animal on their tummy. And when you breathe with your diaphragm, which is deep breathing, which is kind of breathing with your tummy, kids will see the stuffed animal go up and down when they breathe. And so that teaches them to breathe their tummy rather than thoracically, which is breathing up here in the chest.
Got it. Okay. And I had a question regarding morning routines and then how those kind of lead to being attentive in class. I was wondering, are there any things that parents should stay away from that will help in morning routines to help their child stay more focused in school? Like, are there any foods that parents may want to stay away from?
Well, we just generally want kids to have a healthy diet.
Okay.
I think that's the main thing. So
Okay.
there's no superfood or anything else that can make kids have more attention. But I think making sure that they're fed well enough in the morning is important.
Okay.
I think also making sure that I know it gets frustrating when you have a kid that's not wanting to get out the door, but any yelling needs to be kept to a minimum or not at all.
Okay.
And again, that's something where we have to check ourselves and make sure that we are on an even keel. And that if you have issues with paying attention, that you get treatment for that, because that makes a big difference in parenting and also being a parent that is consistent. So, and also we have to, like one parent said, pick your battles. Is it really that big of a deal if the kid's not wearing the outfit that you put out for them? If they come up with their own outfit, maybe it doesn't match a little, but it's weather appropriate. Why not let them go out the door wearing whatever they want to wear? So it's one of those things that it just takes a lot of time. And if you also have the idea of, what's my minimum that I'm okay with my kid doing in the morning? If you just make sure that they got their lunch and they're dressed and they're out the door and whatever else can just happen, then I think that really lowers our stress level. Again, what's the minimum we're okay with our kid doing in the morning to get out the door?
Okay. And Stephanie, when would you say parents can encourage their child to kind of take control and ownership of their own morning routine?
It really depends on your child. So
Okay.
I think that's really individual. And if you look at things like ADHD, your brain functioning is about 1 to 3 years younger than the actual age of your child. So you may have a 8-year-old that acts like a really good 5 or 6-year-old. So we have to look sometimes at developmental age rather than chronological age.
Okay.
And now neurons connect as we get older, so that tends to improve. But again, 1 to 3 years younger. So we really need to look at what are our kids capable of doing on their own. And I recommend trying a part of the routine on their own and see how they do with that one piece of the routine before adding other new parts. Make sure they have mastery of that one thing before we start adding other things.
Got it. Our next parent says, my 6th grader always forgets his homework or his lunch or something when he goes to school. How can I help him remember?
We keep an area near the front of the house where we keep everybody's stuff for the morning. So we have everything laid out ahead of time and you just grab the stuff in your little bin and you go. That helps, having everything in one spot, but also sometimes just understanding that kids are going to leave stuff and we're just going to have to show up at school with it sometimes. And that may go on a little bit longer than you notice that your friends' kids are having to have that done for them because, again, 1 to 3 years younger developmentally. So, but keeping everything in a central location and ready to go in the morning really helps.
Our next parent says, my child is more ODD than ADHD. Any tips on how to make him get dressed, get in the car, and go to school? He is a 7th grader, and I cannot physically pick him up.
Right. Nor should you.
Right.
So when your kids have ODD, I think part of it is that they really want to have a say. They really want to have a feeling of mastery or control over what's going on. So I would ask them, hey, you have to go to school. That's not optional, but let's figure out how we can work together to make this happen. And I've seen some kids with ODD come up with some really good suggestions for how they want to handle their mornings. So I would really kind of turn over them and see what they think. Now, my feeling is that, there's a benevolent dictatorship school of parenting, which is, your kids have a say, but you have the final say. So you can override what they come up with. Okay. But I think at least asking them, helps because, again, you're giving them the control or power to make some decisions. And I think that works really well with ODD. ODD stems from a really strong sense of justice and a sense of wanting to speak out for themselves. So I would really kind of gear it towards that. And also ask them, if they were going to get rewarded for getting things together in the morning, what would they like that reward to be? I found kids are really on the mark with what they should be rewarded with. They come up with really reasonable rewards.
Got it. Chrissy, our next question comes from Chrissy. Chrissy says, my 8-year-old has rough mornings every day, and this includes impulsive screaming and screeching. Any suggestions on how to control that?
Well, I would say, too, what's the screeching coming from? Is it needing attention, or is it just there's sensory overload, or is it just as fun to screech sometimes? So I would really look at what the origin of the screeching is and also have some quiet hours and say, this is something that we need to keep a quiet voice and reward for having a quiet voice. I really like the way that you used a quiet voice this morning. What you don't want to do is say, hey, I like that you didn't screech, because then kids will start screeching because kids don't process don't or not. So, but really reward them for when they have a quiet morning. Also find out what mornings are they not doing the screeching on. What's different that she's having a smooth morning as opposed to a screeching morning, and figure out what's going on in that smooth morning that you could replicate now. What are the differences that happen? Is it the difference of sleep, or is it a stressful thing coming up at school? What exactly is it that changes?
Good point. Our next question comes from Aaron. Aaron says, I have a 12-year-old boy who is going through the early stages of puberty. He knows what he needs to do for his bedtime routine, and he knows how long it should take. But he constantly gets in trouble for taking up to 3 times longer to get it done, which gets him to bed too late. Do you have any tips?
Well, first, that's a normal part of puberty, is that you go through what's called individuation, which means you're separating from your parents. You're learning how to be an individual. And so that's actually developmentally appropriate. So yay. But on the other hand, you got a kid going through puberty, which is rough. So I would just that he's just not feeling very good, or is it that he has a hard time putting multi-step activities together? And keep in mind that when you go through puberty, attention problems can actually seem worse because you've got all those hormones going on. So you have a lot of body changes going on too. So, and also, how much does your child know about puberty? Sometimes explaining to kids what's going on with their bodies really helps them kind of calm down and understand what's happening to them.
Got it. Our next question, my 2.5-year-old always insists on drinking juice before bed, causing him to use the bathroom overnight, which isn't always contained in a diaper. How can I wean him off of drinking before bed?
Does he get thirsty? I mean, that would be my biggest question. If kids get thirsty, you got to give them something to drink. Is it juice, or can you just give them water instead? Maybe that's a comfort ritual for your child. And maybe that's just what they need to do to get into sleep mode. Because we all have our things we do to get prepared for sleep, whether that's reading a book or, as adults. So kids do the same kind of thing. So I would wonder, is your child really thirsty? Is there a way to incorporate more water during the day? Also, check with your child's pediatrician too, and ask them about that too, to rule out any kind of medical issues.
Okay. Our next parent says, what are options for ODD kids if rewards don't work?
Rewards tend to not work with kids with ODD unless they come up with the rewards. So again, I would ask them what the rewards are. There's a really good book by Russell Barkley, that's Barkley, called Your Defiant Child. And that has a really good system for encouraging kids and doing positive reinforcement when other positive reinforcement programs really haven't worked. So I'd highly recommend that book. Any of the books by Barkley are really gold standard for parenting. And there's also one called Taking Charge of ADHD.
Okay.
So I recommend that too. It's Barkley.
Our next parent says, how can I help my 7-year-old boy get dressed by himself without repeating instructions over and over again?
Again, put the instructions on the wall, draw a little person with which thing you put on first, shirt, pants, socks, lay out the outfits ahead of time. Okay. And you can also do forced choice. So let's say your kid doesn't like the outfit you give them. You give them 2 separate outfits. You go, which one would you like? Because then your kid gets a chance to have mastery or have a choice. And they're much more likely to wear something if they have a choice. And again, it's called forced choice because you're only giving them 2 options. So always have the outfit laid out ahead of time. Do a little diagram of how you get dressed. And you may have to help them through it a few times until they get mastery of it. And maybe you just have them put their shirt on by themselves. And then you work on other stuff. And again, if your child's ADHD, 1 to 3 years younger than chronological age. So if you look at it from a developmental standpoint, let's say they're more 4 or 5, you're going to have to change up kind of how you get your kid ready in the morning.
Got it. Okay. We have room for a few more questions. I'm going to try to squeeze them in. Our next parent says, what are your thoughts on melatonin?
Melatonin over the counter has been found not to be effective. The FDA does not regulate melatonin, so there are differences in quality control. Okay. There was a study that found if your child has ADHD and is prescription grade melatonin, which means that it's from your pediatrician only or other doctor, and it's prescribed, that the FDA does do regulations on that. And that has been found to be somewhat effective at getting kids with ADHD into bed and to sleep. Because kids with ADHD tend to have issues with initial insomnia or delayed sleep onset, which just means they have problems getting to sleep. So it has to be prescription grade for it to be effective. Again, over the counter has not been found to be effective, and real issues with quality control.
Got it. Nicolette says, my teenager used to do Taekwondo from when he was 7 until he was 10. Now he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to exercise at all. He stays in his room playing video games. How do I get him to put down the electronics and exercise?
I would say unplug them to the easiest solution, but I'd also want to find out, what happened with Taekwondo that he's not interested anymore. Was there a conflict with the teacher? Was there some negative stuff going on instead of just doing positive reinforcement with the kids? Is your kid feeling sad? Are they feeling like having the blues and you're not really sure why? Do they seem teary at all? I'd check on that too and talk with your pediatrician if that's happening. Also, again, you may have to institute video game times and have kids earn video game and TV time. And that's the kind of method I go with, is that you earn TV video game time if you do certain chores or when you get your homework done. So, and also having mandatory kind of outside time, because being outside changes how the ADHD brain functions. There are several studies about that playing outside helps your neural connections. So I'd really keep an eye on that and ask too about, again, that, what happened with Taekwondo? Maybe it got boring. I mean, I would just find out why it stopped, because it sounds like he was doing pretty well in it for a while. So that's what I'd wonder.
Okay. Katie has a great question. Katie says, if screens keep us awake at night, does that mean they help us wake up in the morning? For example, is TV in the morning a good thing?
Well, actually, up north, because I'm in Tampa, but up north they have light boxes. So those are seasonal affective disorder. That's a depression that goes along with the winter months, so you don't get as much vitamin D in your sunlight. So there are light boxes that will actually imitate sunlight, and so they'll get brighter and brighter as the morning progresses. So that's something that is now getting more affordable, and you can get those online. There's that option. So in that way, screens can be helpful. Sometimes screens do help people stay awake, but With kids, it's usually that they wind up watching the TV and they're holding one sock and not putting it on. They're just standing there watching the TV. So I would say that, light in the morning helps, but I would try to avoid having electronics or backlit devices on because it really kind of freezes the ADHD brain into hyperfocus mode.
Got it. I have one more question for you. Lauren would like to know, do you have any tips on getting kids to calm down before bed after evening sports?
Having an unwind time and again doing some deep breathing and having kids name 3 things they can see, 3 things they can feel, and 3 things they can hear and have them repeat that really helps. Having a progressive muscle relaxation recording, snuggling, reading again a non-backlit book or a real book can help. Also having time just for quiet time in the house. So there's other electronics are turned off as well. Providing that transition time really helps. And just knowing that your kids are going to be kind of wound up when they get home, or even on the car ride home, just doing some deep breathing on the way home. And that'll help you too.
Perfect. Stephanie, thank you so much. Unfortunately,
you're welcome.
That is all the time that we have today, but again, at u.org/calendar. And if you have a question that unfortunately was not answered